everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to our AI Summit, featuring executives from top tech companies revolutionizing the world as we speak. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined here also by a good friend of mine, Alvaro Jimenez. Alvaro?
Happy to be here, Yossi, and welcome everyone to the Boardroom Club.
Yeah, so today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Mark McLaughlin, chairman of the board of Qualcomm, the company behind the technology that powers our smartphones, enables 5G networks, and drives innovation in everything from cars to connected devices. Mark is also a board member in Snowflake and Rubrik, and before that, he was also the chairman of the board and CEO of Palo Alto Networks, took them public, what now is the biggest cyber company in the world. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. The pleasure is ours. So, Mark, I wanted to start with a very interesting question. So, you actually started your career at West Point, not in the tech industry, but did you have this tech bug early on, or is it something that developed over time? And did you have any plan or playbook? Because at the end, you were very successful in all of the companies that you work at.
No, I didn't have any plan at all. So actually, that's a little bit untrue. And my only plan was to go to West Point. That's all I ever really wanted to do. And then I just wanted to be in the Army. So if you had talked to me when I was 20 and said, where do you think you'll be when you're 60, which I am today, I would have said I hopefully would be retiring as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I just wanted to have a military career, but I flew helicopters in the Army, and so my career ended kind of abruptly because I was in an accident and I was medically discharged, which then put me on a different path of one still with no plan. Ended up becoming a lawyer simply because I just needed a job, and did that for a while. And that's actually brought me to Silicon Valley. And then over the course of time, I was extremely fortunate that some people took chances on me along the way where they said, hey, we got this opportunity. You're not the right guy really from a resume perspective, but we got to know you and like you. So how about you give it a try? And I took most of those opportunities, even though they look like left turns. And I ended up having the chance to work with amazing people in different situations and still am today. So all that to say, I tell a lot of folks today, I think people come in two flavors. One is there's some people who have a life plan, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're very organized and think like, I know exactly what I want to do when I want to do it. And then there's others who kind of go with it, if you will. I'm the second category. And if I look back today, I'd say my career was very eclectic, very fortuitous. It hinged a ton on, like I said, networking and people taking chances on me and taking those chances myself to go do things that didn't really jive with what the path looked like that was right in front of me. So I give that advice to people is like, hey, you might think about being open to, even if you have a plan, being open to opportunities when they present themselves.
Absolutely. And it seems that it worked out just fine. And I have actually a follow-up about it. So, okay, you started your career in the tech world, but was there any particular career pivot after you joined the tech world or decision that completely changed the trajectory of your professional life?
Yeah, so after I was discharged from the Army, I went to law school in Seattle, not in Silicon Valley. And there's reasons for that don't matter. But when I graduated from law school, during the course of law school, I kind of got interested in like intellectual property rights. This is early 1990s, so software hadn't exploded yet. It was pretty early, right? And then I was very fortunate that I had a job offer from the biggest firm in Seattle to go join them. And then through various reasons that don't matter either, I also had a job offer to come to a firm in Silicon Valley. And I took that one. So I said, if I go down there just for 2 years, right, there's a lot happening. So I thought if you were interested in finance coming out of college, for example, or coming out of an MBA program, and you wanted to go to ground zero, you'd go to Wall Street, right? So I kind of felt the same way, which was I was interested in technology law, not tech, just law, technology law. So why don't I go to Silicon Valley because I have the opportunity just for a couple of years and practice there, and then I'd be that much more educated and valuable when I went back to Seattle, which is where I figured I'd live the rest of my life. And that's what brought me down here. And then I practiced for a very short period of time with a firm. And then one of our clients asked me, this is one of those twists, right? A small publicly traded software company that I worked with said, hey, why don't you join us and become in the company, as the lawyer? And it's like, well, I only graduated from law school a year ago, right? I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. So I left private practice, went into that company, and then met people along the way there that kind of each each next phase of things was somebody said, I met you doing this and I'm doing this other thing. Why don't you join me doing this other thing? I kind of quickly left the legal practice and became like a business development guy because I liked working on deals, and then was in a company that sold to a bigger company. And then I ended up being the general manager running that company inside the bigger company. And that was the first time I owned a P&L. And that was more the trajectory then, and a trajectory rather into being, a CEO from that point. I had lots of jobs in between that one and a CEO job, but they were increasing areas of responsibility with P&Ls and managing people.
So what I will take is go with the people rather than with the names of the company, because at the end you don't work with the name of the building.
I'll just give you, there's anecdotes along the way. Here's one, right? I was with this startup. The startup got bought by a company called VeriSign right at the height. I mean, the absolute height of the dot-com bubble was just about to burst, but not yet. And so this small company I was with, and I was not the CEO, I was running business development and sales. When the company got acquired, he left. The CEO just said, thank you very much, took his whatever $100 million in stock and left, right? And so the folks at VeriSign said to me, how about you run it for us? And that was my first general management job. So I said, okay, because I said, yeah, I'd like to give that a shot. Well, it turns out that financially, the guy who left made a ton of money because he sold everything right away. And then VeriSign stock went from $250 to $4, he got out. And by me becoming the general manager, I couldn't sell anything because I was an insider, and rode it all the way down. So my point in that is not bad. It's actually interesting in the long-term perspective, which was at the time I thought, oh, what a mistake I made. I shouldn't have taken this job. I should have just cashed out and left. But by taking that role, that's actually what then put me on a path to become a COO, then a CEO, and all the things that came later on. So I tell people today, I'm like, you have to be very careful about judging a situation in the moment, something that doesn't feel good. You're like, oh, this is a disaster. It turns out sometimes to be some of the best stuff that happened, including, by the way, the helicopter accident I was in. I ended up in Walter Reed Hospital for a long time, and it was a crushing thing to be discharged from the Army. My career was over. I was in lots of physical issues, but I know for a fact that had that not happened, I wouldn't be married to my wife and have 3 great kids, right? So I tell that story a lot to young people. I'm like, the worst thing that ever happened in my life at that time, where I was at the deepest, darkest depths of depression when I was 24, that single thing of all the success that I've been fortunate to have, and it's great, all that aside, the single worst thing that ever happened to me, I thought, turns out to be the single best thing that ever happened to me on anything that matters and is meaningful, right? So sometimes you might have to wait a few decades before realizing what actually some of these bad things, right, turns out to be extraordinarily good things in your life. So don't judge too quickly.
I agree. So what could be maybe not the best situation at the moment could be beneficial for the long term. You never know what you're gonna get, as they say in Forrest Gump. And I want to shift a little bit the gears to your current role at Qualcomm as the chairman. And Qualcomm is the epicenter of innovation right now with all the things that going on with AI. But I wanted to ask you, how do you view specifically the board roles in guiding the company through this maybe once in a generation technology disruption with all the geopolitical tension that specifically is going with all the chips out there?
It's fascinating. Joke with our board at Qualcomm, which is a group of amazing people, that we should be paying to be on the board, because the company it's an important company. I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I mean that in a technical way. And because of that level of technical importance, it's involved in everything that matters geopolitically today. And there's a lot that matters that's going on. So to be associated with that, to have the fortune to be associated with that, is a front row seat and involvement in a lot of stuff. When you pick up the newspaper every morning, well, you don't pick up papers anymore, but when you look at the news every morning and you're reading about chips and issues with China and geopolitics and American politics and tariffs and all sorts of stuff, Qualcomm's involved in every single one of those things. So it's been fascinating for me to be around the table on that. Now, on your question of what's the role of the board and all that, there's a lot of things that go into it, but very importantly, I'm convinced the main job of the board of directors of any company, but particularly a large publicly traded company, the main job is to hire and fire the CEO. full stop, right? There's a lot of other stuff you're going to do on governance and all sorts of things, right? But that's the main job. And that is the single thing that's going to determine the success of the company, right? So being aware of that, and then if you're the chairperson of the board, you have some added responsibility there. I'm convinced I've been on lots of boards now and a number of transitions, including my own transition out of Palo Alto Networks. Getting those right is not easy, particularly if you have a large company. And we're very, very fortunate at Qualcomm to have Cristiano Amon running the company, who was in the company, and we elevated him to the CEO role a number of years ago. Exactly the right choice, it turns out. But because he's so good, he has a great team underneath him, right? And then because they're so good, they're able to deal with lots of opportunities and risk in the business that otherwise we may not capitalize on the opportunities or might succumb to the risk, right? But the talent's the most important thing, and the role of the board, first and foremost, is to hire and fire the CEO, and then do all the other stuff too. But that's the number one thing.
It's a great segue for my next question, because you mentioned Cristiano and he led Qualcomm through these major transformations. But can you share a little bit more about the dynamic between the board and the executive team in building long-term strategy?
There's different methods and models. The way that I have always acted, for lack of a better term, when I was the CEO was in full transparency. I think that's a good way to live your life, and particularly from an executive management team. And if you have chosen well from a board perspective about who's on your board, it's not hard then to be on the same team. Right now, having said that, one comment I want to make very clear. The board's job, they're not on the executive management team. The board's job is to protect the shareholders' interest, right? But there need not be undue tension between those two things, right? So if you're a CEO, high-performing CEO with a high-performing team who has a good sense of self-awareness and humility, then you would be able to say to the board, I'll do my best job and you judge me, right? And I'm good with that. And if you have a very good board, they'll say, great, let's work together then on this, right? So you can tell us anything, you should tell us everything, and we'll give you our best advice to get that done, including long-term strategy of the company. So with that kind of background about how I grew up, if you will, in a CEO role and working with my own boards and then doing a number of boards myself, I find that to be the best way to go about things. And if you're doing that, then you get to put a lot of tactical things that have to be done. They don't have to take too long. And you can really focus then on strategy and long-term prospects for the company, which is the most interesting thing for people anyway.
That's right. And I guess also when you look at Qualcomm, I know that Qualcomm is one of the biggest companies out there and obviously super innovative. But oftentimes, I guess you need to ask yourself, maybe it's time to compete, but other time it's maybe better to actually collaborate. And I know that specifically Qualcomm has collaboration with major tech players like Samsung and Apple. But how do you navigate and balance between rivalry and collaboration?
Well, I'll answer that without being specifically Qualcomm, because it's the same for other companies as well in competitive positions. I think the proper way to look at that is to understand that you would be in a highly competitive market. Like if you're in a market that matters, where the TAM is, like Qualcomm's TAM is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, right? So in a space that's big enough to matter like that, you're going to have a lot of competition, very intense competition. And along the way, though, there will be opportunities because the market moves very rapidly where you get an opportunity to team up, right, and work with folks. Some of them might actually be your competitors, and it might make sense for some period of time to collaborate while you continue to compete. So there's not crazy where you have lines of business that are highly competitive with the competition and other lines of businesses that you can collaborate on. And to be open to say, let's collaborate in the ones that make sense, it works, right? It can work. If you take the position to say, we're just so competitive, we can never do anything together, you're probably going to miss opportunities that would help both of you move forward in a market that's big enough that you can both be in it, right? So I think there's kind of a fallacy for CEOs and maybe boards as well, that if you're in a big market, that one player runs the table in the market. And they might for a period of time where they have a very dominant position, right? Without picking on anybody, like NVIDIA today, a very dominant position in a market. But in almost all cases over time, if the market's big enough and interesting enough, there's going to be a lot of competition, and that there's going to be a number of players that are going to do very well. And kind of recognizing that instead of saying there can only be one, right? If you have that mindset, you're likely to miss a lot of collaboration opportunities along the way.
So same thing as you mentioned about your career, don't play only on ego. Sometimes it's better to collaborate rather than compete. And it's something that actually very common in cybersecurity, where you could see a lot of collaborations because there are a lot of cyber threats. So collaboration could actually provide the end users and the clients the best possible outcome and service. And Mark, I want now to move to a little bit the technical side of things. So Qualcomm has positioned itself as a leader in on-device AI, but what do you think are the biggest advantages of running AI on the edge versus in the cloud?
A couple ways to think about that. The most obvious one would be the difference between training and inference, right? So just the amount of compute power it takes to train models, and whether they're LLMs or SLMs, but there's an enormous amount of compute power. And today that can only really be done in the cloud, right? So training for all intent purposes gets done there. From an inference perspective, today a lot of inference gets done in the cloud as well, but that's actually not because that's the right place to do it. It's because the edge compute hasn't evolved to the point that you can actually run high amounts of inference at the edge. And that's really what Qualcomm's play is in AI. Now, Qualcomm has an entry in the data center as well, so I'm not putting that aside. I'm just saying as the company that has defined edge computing as inference is possible, increasingly possible at scale at the edge, then Qualcomm should do well in that, right? And just as a big picture, like Qualcomm aside, if AI doesn't move to the edge, you can't actually do lots of very high quality inference at the edge, then AI will not become ubiquitous, right? So, or the different way to say it is like, here I've got my phone, right? If I can't actually consume AI in enterprise class applications, not just consumer stuff, not ChatGPT, right? They have enterprise offerings as well, but just everything that every enterprise says, hey, we're all AI all day long now. If I can't consume that here or at the edge or my laptop or something, it's not very useful. So it has to come to the edge in order for AI to actually be part of your daily life and ubiquitous. And then there's the cost aspect as well, which is it's cost an enormous amount of money, as we've seen, right, to train models and also do inference. So if all the inference has to be done in the cloud, that round trip is extraordinarily expensive, both in compute and transport rates to do that. So there's a cost aspect where those players, the hyperscalers, the players in the markets, very much want to get as much as they can to the edge as fast as they possibly can, as long as it's a very high quality experience, because the cost differences are giant around that. So it go from losing a lot of money to making a lot of money if you can figure that out. So in there, back to Qualcomm is a very, very big opportunity, we think, over time to define that edge computing capabilities for AI.
And specifically, if you're looking at the edge, I know that now everyone talking about physical AI and robotics. So it seems that it's only the beginning for this specific vertical in AI. And Mark, I have one last question before I pass the mic to Alvaro. So when you look at what's happening with AI today, you've been there also with the internet and the .com era, but do you think the AI will have much bigger impact than the internet?
Very possibly. It's a little hard to say. I think it's very difficult when you're in the moment to understand how big the moment can be. And that was definitely true in the web browser. It was true in just the internet itself. It was true in SaaS, right? True in online payments, business I was in for a while. So in all these cases, there was the view to say, this is going to be giant, right? Some people will say, this will be giant. There was a lot of rushing in, if you will, that turned out that a lot of that build out was before the actual value would actually show up. Then there was the trough of right? kind of disillusionment. But it turned out in all those cases, and probably the case in AI, if history repeats itself, that the value that will be garnered from AI is probably bigger than what we're thinking about today, even for people who are like, it's going to be massive. The question really is when. When will that happen? And you can see tons of investment happening today against that thesis, very similar to the build out of just the internet, if you go back into the late 90s and said, hey, the internet's going to be a big deal, and with the web browser being launched and massive amounts of capital going into that to prepare the world for that. And, we're seeing similar things happening in AI as well. So I think the real question is not so much as like, is it a big deal or not? I think it's clearly a big deal. It's when is it a big deal that everybody uses in a way that's ubiquitous, like they're using the internet, or they're using smart devices, or they're using things that are transformational technology. Right? And this has a ton of promise. So I'm very confident it's going to be a really, really big deal, but I just don't know if that's tomorrow, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Yeah, a little hard to tell.
Only time will tell. And indeed, it's very interesting time, specifically now. People say even if we stop the development of AI, there will be still 20 years of application, and I don't know, like something else that will come as a result of the current development. And if people say, okay, 95% of all AI fail, so you say, okay, it seems that maybe there is still way to go until we get the right formula. And so, Mark, thank you so much. I got a bunch of more questions to ask you, but Alvaro here is also a fantastic question. So, Alvaro, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Yossi. Mark, I want to talk a little bit more about cybersecurity and strategic leadership, right? So we've talked to many people within the cyberspace, and we talk about the importance of long-term strategy in cyber, because more and more, and especially with AI, which you just discussed with Yossi, it's going to be more important. So how would you say you would balance urgency and patience when talking about corporate strategy within cyber?
Great question. So cyber is a very interesting space in that every technical transformation that occurs, or even move forward that occurs, has an impact on cyber. So if something really big happens, the bad guys use it, right? And the good guys use it, right? And usually the bad guys get to use it faster and more deeply than the good guys because they don't have any rules. So it takes time. So if you go look at all these things we talked about, like the internet itself, and then the browser, and then there was payments, and then there's SaaS, and then there's cloud, and now there's AI. In every one of those cases, it changed cybersecurity in some ways, in a lot of ways, for the worse, because these were capabilities that didn't exist before. The bad actors jumped on it and can use them. Then it changed cybersecurity for the better, because it also made the white hats better, or able to defend and protect better. So keeping that in mind, I think the answer to your question is like, hey, you have to have a strategy. And the strategy that I always ascribed to was not one that said, we're going to solve cybersecurity. It's going to go away. We don't need it anymore. I think that's naive, right? The strategy we always used was to say, we have to make it increasingly expensive. So for a cyber criminal to successfully do something bad, we have to make it very expensive for them to do that. And that wouldn't end cybersecurity, but it would put a lot of people out of business. And if a lot of them are out of business, then the less people are in the business, and then those are more visible, right? And if they're more visible, then working with law enforcement, working with treaties, perhaps you can do more about those than anything that technology itself is going to do. So I think it's very important to have a strategic view about what does success look like, right, in any business, but because that's really will drive, like, what's your vision for this? And if that vision is ambitious but also attainable, then you know where to make the investments into how to measure success along the way for yourself, for your shareholders, for your customers, like that. So I think it's very important to think strategically in cybersecurity, but I think it would be a mistake that strategy sounds something like, we don't need it anymore because we got so good at it, right? Or the problem's going to go away.
That's actually a great point. The best consulting question you can ask whenever you're doing an interview is like, what does success look like, right? And perhaps it looks like building a generational company. So I want to bring you back to Palo Alto. When you took the company public, laid the foundation of what is now the world's largest cybersecurity firm. For a founder, cyber or not, what advice would you give on building the right foundation for a generational company?
That's a very good question. I do speak to people quite often about this, CEOs, and there's a number of things that go into that answer, but I put them in these categories. One is self-awareness. And what I mean by that is not just your own self-awareness, but self-awareness about what do you have. Right? Almost all companies can be slotted in, if you will, into this is a feature, this is a product, this is possible that this could be a suite of products, or this is a platform. That might be an oversimplification, but it's one that works for me. Today, everybody you talk to says, I have a platform. It's an extremely overused term. So by being precise about definitions and self-awareness, I think is very helpful as you try to build a company. So if we just said, hey, a platform is something where there's more value generated from third-party products and services on the platform than the platform itself, then you eliminate almost everybody. And that's a Bill Gates definition, right? And I think that's right. And then you can go down industries and say, well, who's a real platform player? Apple's a real platform player because it turns out this is the platform and I can get enormous amounts of third-party capabilities across it. Apple doesn't have to design everything themselves. Google's a platform, and Microsoft is a platform, AWS is a platform. So you get out in these situations, go, those are real platforms because they built the underlying infrastructure that allows lots more content to run on top of the infrastructure and get a lot of value from it. Okay. So sorry to diverge on the definition of platform for a second, but I think it's back to self-awareness. If you ascribe to that and say, okay, that's right, well, then almost no company has a platform. Let's just stop talking it that way and go, you might have a platform here, Mr. Miss Entrepreneur, right, with your company. Perhaps we'll find out. But if we're going to find out, it's going to be a long time, right? And it's statistically unlikely. But that doesn't mean you can't dream and be ambitious. But maybe you could see a path to that. So what do you actually have now? Most companies have features where it turns out over time that they're doing something really interesting. The company may grow very quickly to a certain stage, particularly in security, and then find out that's just part of a platform, or it's at least part of a product. Yeah. So the first point is self-awareness, to say, what do I have today, and where can I see that going in this feature, product suite, platform, with eyes wide open, be ambitious, but also understand what you actually have. When you understand that, you then can get busy, as you should, and say, what is my addressable market opportunity that I'm playing in? That's the total addressable market. How much of it can I service with what I actually have today? And how much do I think I can service if I had this roadmap that built the following things? Now you have some sense of how big my company can get inside of my serviceable addressable market as I kind of build it out over time. I think that's an extremely important point that a lot of people don't do. And then many companies confuse quick success, meaning 0 to 50, 0 to 100, something like that very quickly, with they're on the path of building a legendary company. And almost all of them don't, right? Because they misconstrue, what do I have and how big is the opportunity with what I have? What can I make it, in the next generation, and to continue to build in there. So the self-awareness acts part of it, then the discipline to do the work on the TAM and the SAM, the serviceable addressable market, super important. And with those things in hand, you can actually have a plan, a strategic plan. We always ran our company on a 3-year rolling strategic plan. Of course, we had an operating plan, but the operating plan was an output of a 3-year view about where we're going, not so much the whole thing. So if you do that, then you have a sense of where you're going and how, why you're going there and how long it's going to take and moves you have to make over the next 36 months to get to that point. And then next year you roll it forward. So with all that in mind, that's how you scale companies. Well, if you are scaling very rapidly because you're in a market that is growing quickly and you have something really interesting and you're not thinking kind of like that I'm talking about here, you're very likely to hit a wall on scaling, at least, right? Where you go, I got to clean a lot of stuff up, right? Because we didn't take the time to really think forward on this. So, and that's paramount in cybersecurity.
And I love that you explained how this works to scale a company. And because one of the success stories of this case, which is CyberArk, we actually interviewed Uri Mokari, their executive chairman, and we wanted to talk a little bit about this because the company was bought by Palo Alto not too long ago in August. And it does seem like there's a shift in the industry towards consolidation, which also ties in with your comment about most of the companies have features which can be bought by these huge companies that have platforms. Why do you think that the biggest companies still rely on dozens of cyber defense providers and it's not something that we see in other verticals? I'm not sure if it's linked to what you just explained about these huge companies that have their platforms.
I think it's because the problem in cybersecurity moves so quickly. There's no such thing where you say, okay, for the next 3 years, good guys, bad guys, right? We're all going to use the same technology for the next 3 years, and let's fight it out. It just changes constantly. So our thesis, I had at Palo Alto Networks, and Nikesh has done an amazing job with this as well afterwards, is that there's going to be, or there are platforms, I'm using my definition of platforms, like there's going to be platforms in cybersecurity. They're taking longer to materialize in the sense of third-party product over the platform trade, because security moves so fast that the problem set changes all the time. But if companies center down on customers, center down on larger, but increasingly larger cybersecurity offerings from the same vendor, right? Then the vendor and the customer get to work together so that their team, which is the least infinite resource they have, it's a very finite resource, the team can actually gain expertise on running infrastructure, security infrastructure everywhere in the enterprise. So if you had one vendor who was your network vendor, your cloud security vendor, and your endpoint vendor, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if that was the case, but a vendor who runs more and more of that, they have more and more of your data. If they have more and more of your data and other people's data, well, it turns out data is the oil that makes it run in cybersecurity. If you can do things with that data very quickly, faster and faster, and turn it around in the face of threats and remediate them as fast as possible, you make it more expensive for the bad guys to win, back to my other point. So the network effect of security is very powerful from a data perspective. And with AI, it's going to be supercharged on top of that. We're seeing in cybersecurity, industry has been around for a long time, and there were no big cybersecurity companies. There was a giant problem, but even the biggest companies back in the day, Check Point, Cisco, they were not giant. But now we're actually seeing the rise of cybersecurity platform plays, with Palo Alto Networks being preeminent. And in those cases, the network effect that having the data, having the sensors in the enterprise to get the data, having the data, turning the data very quickly to provide solutions, that's going to separate the pack. And you're going to have, like you have in all big industries. In cloud, we have AWS, we have Azure, we have GCP, right? And a lot of other people too, right? But we have three big players. So in any giant TAM, it's almost always the case that you end up with three big players, one really big one medium one small. They're all giant, right? But just from relative size. And then thousands and thousands of companies who run great businesses on those platforms. And I think that's the future of cybersecurity. It just takes longer in cyber because threats go so quickly. So now the short answer to your question is, like, nobody can do it all, right? Because it's going so fast, nobody can do it all. If you have a platform view, and Nikesh talks all the time, platformization, right? If you have a platform view, then you can't actually build and develop everything that's needed on the platform yourself. So you're going to look for fantastic capabilities and you're going to put them in the platform. And if you have a extensible platform like they do, it's not that, I don't want to say it's easy, right? But it's very conceivable that you can get these great products and capabilities and put them in the platform and get them to the value to the customers very quickly.
That's very interesting, and brings me to my last question before we go into a little bit more personal insights that you have, which is now in the age of AI, where there's a new wave of AI models, and it seems that every 2 months we're entering a phase where everything is changing so rapidly that everything that we had 3 months ago is already old and has to be deprecated in favor of new tools. Are we approaching an arms race in cyber too, where every 3 months we have a completely different threat, and just the levels of threats, they're everywhere? And because we have AI, individuals also have to be careful about what they're doing with their data online. Can you give us a glimpse of how you see the future in cyber?
There's a decent picture and then there's a really bad one, right? And I don't know if I'm smart enough to know which one's going to work out, but underneath your question, right, you just said, when we look at all these large scale technical transformations that's happened in the last 20 or 30 years, right? And I listed a bunch from the internet and cloud and SaaS, right? There's not hundreds, there's a few, right, that we've lived through that have been impactful. The impact of them kind of get bigger along the way, right? So if I give you just two now and say, well, look, if AI is actually all that everybody says it's going to be, and you were a bad actor, it just got a lot less expensive, right, to launch increasingly sophisticated attacks. So that's great news if you're the bad guys. So then how fast can the good guys harness that and go forward with it? So that itself, I mean, I've seen deep fakes, AI generated deep fakes of people like me saying something that it's not me, and never said that, right? So you can imagine fake earnings calls, right? Or all sorts of bad stuff that could lead to massive fraud along those ways. So AI, a very powerful weapon in both directions, right? So we'll see how that plays out in the arms race. And the one that's coming behind that is quantum. And quantum has the chance of making cyber extraordinarily difficult, right? From a defense perspective, it also has the opportunity to wipe out a lot of cyber criminals as well if it's harnessed first and better by the good guys. But it's definitely an interesting time. And I think cyber is going to change dramatically in the next 10 years in the sense of the problem is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because of these things. The solutions will change dramatically. That gives rise to lots of companies' opportunities to grow. And it's going to make these platform players even bigger, I think. That's what's going to happen.
An amazing insight. And we could talk about quantum and cyber in a complete new interview, 45 minutes, because it's such a fascinating space. But unfortunately, we have a limit, and I don't want to let you go without some last questions that are a little bit more personal, okay? Because you've had a great career, and we want to learn about what are the things that you think have been most important throughout your career, in particular, when making decisions under uncertainty, right? So you've led companies through intense growth and global uncertainty. You told us a little bit about your story, but can you explain to us how you decide? What is your decision-making framework when, for example, you encounter that terrible time in that company during the dot-com bubble?
This advice we give to CEOs in particular, don't confuse being the CEO with knowing everything. Those are not the same things. And I think a lot of people get their identity wrapped up into, I'm expected to have the answers. And if I don't have the answers, then somehow I look weak and people might question me or question my authority. I think that's exactly the wrong move, which would be to be very open with people to say, I don't have all the answers, right? But collectively, perhaps as a team, we're not going to have all the answers either. We may have some really good ideas of what the answers might be. And we'll go stress test them as fast as possible. We're going to get a number of them wrong. We just need to get 51% of them right. So that attitude with people where you actually live that allows people you work with, who work for you, work with, it allows them to have this same attitude, which is, I'm being encouraged here to come up with the best ideas, knowing that not all of them are going to work, but we're going to collectively go after it together as a team. And if they turn out to be not great ideas, it didn't kill me, right? It didn't end my career. It didn't put me in the doghouse. That's not the situation. It takes a level of confidence, if you will, right? I think I can't think of a better word, maybe confidence. I'll use that word, right? It takes a level of confidence for leaders to expose themselves that way, right? To the team, to the board, to other people, and just say, I don't know, right? Here's what I do know. Here's what I think we need to know. Here's how I intend to get that information. And then we're going to make a decision. And I guarantee the decision is not going to be perfect because we don't have the time to make it perfect. We don't have the data to make it perfect, but we have enough. We're going to go this way. And I also tell you that I will be quick to, if it turns out to be not the right call, I will take the responsibility for it and we'll move in a different direction. And if you're transparent, like I said before, and thoughtful, you can build credibility over time with your investors, with your team, with your board, with your staff, like everybody, customers even. And when you slip on the banana peel, and you will, that they go, okay, I'm like, I trust you're going to get it right. That's going to happen, right? Like you're going to miss the number. Eventually, your product's going to break. Customers' network's going to be down. Something's going to happen, right? Again, it's a guarantee. The question is, when that happens, what do you do with that? How do you get out of it? And I think how you get out of those things, where you fix them and solve them, is that defines companies and that defines teams together. When everything's working, nobody learns anything, or very little, they should say. They don't learn much of anything when everything's working. It's only you find out who you are, you find out who your team is, you find out what the culture of the company is, you find all that stuff when things are not working, right? And use those as opportunities to continue to grow.
And to learn, right? Okay, yeah. So aside from work, you have a life outside of work. So you must have something that you really like, any special hobby or passion. Can you share with us?
My thing outside of work is, from a hobby perspective, is I've always been, or not always, but in my 30s got into fly fishing. I enjoy that a lot. And I found that to be, even though you're very active when you're doing that, people, it's not fishing like throw a line in, sit and drink a beer in a chair, right? You're moving all the time. You got to think about what you're doing. You have a strategy, right? And usually in beautiful places. And I always found that to be, even if I had a lot of thoughts in my mind, business thoughts in my mind, I came up with some of my best solutions out in the river somewhere. A lot of people who play golf say the same thing. Like, you're working on something you'll never be perfect at, but you're in the zone, and even though you're very active, it takes your mind off the other thing, and then insights happen, right? Because you took your face away from the paper for a little while. So that's always been my hobby. I enjoy that a lot.
So this is a more active hobby, but what about a favorite movie or a favorite book that you would recommend?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, I'm going to tell you, this might sound a little nutty, okay, but it's just a fact. So, and depending where you're coming from, but actually my favorite book, which I've read many, many times, is the Bible. Right? And obviously there's a religious aspect of what I'm saying in that, right? But you can't make that stuff up. Like, if it's the best drama ever in the history of mankind is in there, right? So for me, I read lots of books, but I read that one every day, and there's always something new in there for me, even if I read the same story 100 times. So I like that one. Movies, I have so many movies I like, but the one that I particularly like is Charlie Wilson's War. I don't know if you ever watched that one, but it's a kind of a true story, and Tom Hanks movie, but super enjoyable. And I like movies or stories where there's more than a grain of truth, and you're like, who'd ever expect that happened?
Those are the best movies when they're based on true facts and a true story, and you're like, you can't make that up because it's so wild. But
Exactly.
Mark, it was truly a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I'm gonna pass now. Yes, back to you.
Mark, thank you so much as well. It's been a pleasure. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other amazing episodes with, for example, the CEO of Coralogics that mentioned Mark. We have also CEO of Coicity, another cyber company, CEO of Box. It's going to be interesting. So thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, Mark, it's been fun.
I know all those guys you're about to have, and they're fantastic leaders. So I encourage everybody to take a listen to them too. So
yeah, and to be honest, when we hosted Ariel Astra from Coralogics, so he mentioned you, and then we said, okay, we're gonna host Mark in a couple of weeks. And oh no, you're gonna release the episodes of Mark after me. So
that's funny. Ariel's a great leader. Fortunate to get to talk to him about every 2 weeks. So he's a good man.
yeah, he's a good guy, definitely. So Mark, thank you so much.